Hello YouTube! If you're an OG of the channel, you might remember that 5 years ago I started my road to 28 inches legs. And this road concluded just yesterday, because I finally reached that measurement. So, in this video I want to recap my journey and how I got there. To give you a small breakdown if you haven't been following me, from 2020 to 2023, I grew 1 inch, and I was during a period of time where I was recomping. And the way I managed to do that, which is fairly impressive because without gaining body weight, I added a lot of mass, was simply to start paying attention to my weak point, which was my hamstring. For my first 5 years of serious lifting in the gym, I only did squats for the most part. I never isolated the hamstrings, and so I had a huge imbalance in my legs. And it was very easy to add an inch simply by taking Romanian deadlifts and hyperextensions more seriously. So that was the first part of the journey. Then the second part started on the bulk, and something that I found out personally is that my legs blow up the second I put on weight. From 2023 to 2025, I grew another inch, and this time it was by gaining 10 pounds. Now, a 10-pound gain is not negligible, but for an inch, that's a lot of muscle mass that I put on. And so here is how I did it. Number one is I focused on compound movements. If you've been following me and my leg training advice, I've always been a huge proponent of heavy compound movements because to me they're the king for hypertrophying the lower body. That being said, I do think that there is a way to skew it to make it even more bodybuilding friendly. And that is to start taking these squats and hinges and optimize them for hypertrophy using certain methods. I don't mean by this to say that it's impossible to build big legs with like squats and random deadlifts. It is possible. It's how I started. But if you keep doing that, eventually you'll get to a point where the amount of energy you'll have to put in with that method, with the return you'll get, will be completely skewed. And your hypertrophy road and your road to bigger legs is going to be greatly slowed. So instead, what I recommend is picking variations that are better aligned with your goals. For example, something that I've started to do is doing all of my squats with elevated heels. This is a game changer because that way, you're going to be able to use more quads and recruit less lumbar spine, which in the long run will make recovery easier and make targeting the muscle we want to grow, which is the quad, much easier too. And I've actually brought the slant board that I personally use to show you guys. So this is the one that I'm going with. The brand is Strong Tech. This is not a placement produit or whatever. I'm just saying this is what I'm using. So as you can see, it's fairly huge. It doesn't even really fit in the frame with me. If we go around like this, right, and then you use it in that fashion where you can select the angle that you want and you just place it wherever you want. And once it's placed, you get this nice angle. So you can see that the angle can go very high. I'm going to keep that in my hand because I'm going to show you the angles that I use. But every single squat that I do on this. And the number one reason why is because first, it forces you to push the knees forward. You can't open up the taint. And as an hypertrophy enthusiast and specialist, I can tell you that this is the way to go for bigger quad. You want the knees to go forward. Of course, without pain or injuries, but this really helps. We can also talk about the fact that because the board is so small, you don't have much space to put your feet. So you're forced to have a narrow stance, which in retribution creates an even stronger ability to push the knees forward because you can't spread the legs apart, you don't have the space for that. Since your feet are most likely going to be pointed forwards, you cannot play around with toes out on something like this unless you want your heels to touch, which is not a good idea. So this has been tremendous in my ability to grow my quads. Past the point where I honestly thought back then that I had reached some sort of limit because my quads were already obnoxiously big, and yet I managed to add even more onto that. So this makes me truly believe that this is the way to go for anyone who wants to train for hypertrophy using squats. Now, the natural byproduct of such an implement is also that you're not going to be able to squat as much weight. For me, I found a loss between 15 to 30% on my loads depending on the angle. The more acute the angle, the more you're going to lose. This is perfectly fine. This is actually what we want. It's a win for hypertrophy because we get better stimulus for less fatigue. Now, the reason why you can't lift as much is because you can't use your back as much, you can't use your hips as much, so it's very, very quad dominant. In that way, suddenly a 3-plate squat, which is very easy to reach when you just do high bar squat or even, God forbid, low bar squat, becomes an actual feat because it means that you have quads that can push 3 plates, not just a posterior chain that can push 3 plates. Now, in terms of the angles that I personally use, I don't like to go overboard, so I use 2, if I can show you here, which is the neutral one that is down there and the first one. So if I use the slant board in a neutral position, this just means that it's going to rest, oh, that noise was not good, on itself like this. So it's a very strong position, and this is the angle that I will get. If I want to go a bit higher to make it more difficult, I will use the first slant, and this is a slightly more acute angle. This is still very comfortable, still very stable. There's no risk of like falling unless you're a complete ditz. And this is the angle that I use for belt squats and for back squats. And the first, which is a little bit less acute, I use for SSB squats. So that's it for the slant board. And it's something that I recommend anyone gets because using plates to put underneath your heels can be fine at the start, but it's hard to standardize. And the elevation it's giving you is almost nothing because your foot might be here and with a plate it might be here. With this, my foot is like this. So this is quite the challenge for the quads. On top of that, this is very sturdy and stable. I like this board in particular. I would recommend if you get one to get one that is high quality because once you start getting into the 300, 400 pound range, plus your body weight, you don't want to be on something that can snap. You know, when I step on this and I have a total weight of 600 pounds on this, I want to be sure in my mind that it's not going to just break under my feet because that could be catastrophic. But it's a tremendous tool because it's going to allow you to get more out of less weight. And on top of that, it's going to, in a sense, humble you because you won't be able to cheat. So with your squats, but also with stuff like the belt squat. The belt squat machine, I've rarely seen people actually use it properly. I always see people put their feet as wide as they can, toes pointed out, and they do a weird like low bar good morning to move as much weight as possible with little range of motion. That is stupid. Take a slant board, put it at the end of the belt squat, put your feet on it and do your reps like this and tell me how much you can lift. I guarantee you it's going to be cut by half. I keep seeing people who can belt squat more than they can high bar. That's a dead giveaway, you're not using it properly. 200 pounds on the belt squat with this implement for reps of 15 will make you want to die. And that is exactly the point. So that is what I did personally the past year to put an inch on my legs while using specific squat variations. What about now the posterior chain? Posterior chain is the same exact logic. I still believe in heavy pulls. This is how I built my legs. But I think we can be smart about it for even better results. So for example, if you're the type who does deadlifts, I recommend you switch your deadlifts for Romanian deadlifts. You'll find you get a much better stretch because there's a negative. It's easier to bias the arm string because you can push back the glutes because you can focus on the negative, which is not possible with deadlifts. If you do it with deadlifts, you'll do a stiff leg deadlift, which is great, but not as good for hypertrophy. And you'll also get constant tension for the arms, but also for the traps. When people say, oh, deadlifts are great for traps, correct. Romanian deadlifts are even better because your traps are stretched throughout the set. They never get any time to relax. Then we also have the good mornings, a lift that people don't tend to like or promote. I personally do, but there is a way to do them for better hamstring development. I recommend doing them with a narrow stance, so less than shoulder width, with your feet pointed forward, so no toes outside, and when you bend over, you want the line of your shoulders to get past the line of your hips. So that's a lot of range of motion. Of course, you want to get to that point. Don't just jump into it. And if you can do it with an SSB, that's recommended because it's much more comfortable and safe than a high bar. But if you can get to that, if you can get to repping heavy weights with that for sets of 12, you will really feel that tension in your hamstrings, and it's a game changer. And then lastly, we have hyperextensions. There are many ways to do hyperextensions. Even if you don't have an hyperextension bench, you can just set a barbell below your hip crease and then grab dumbbells in your hands and bend over the barbell and fold yourself over it. That replicates an hyperextension, and it's a killer for the hamstrings. You can also do them with a snatch grip on the hyperextension bench. I personally really like the snatch grip for more range of motion. You don't go all the way up, you don't extend the spine at the top, so that you can focus on stretching the legs. But basically, anything where you are going to hinge at the hips with a heavy weight, either in your hands or on your back, with proper form, is going to grow your hamstrings. And the more you manage to do the movement with a frozen knee, so with little knee flexion, the better it tends to become, because you are actively skewing the movement towards what we would call a pure hinge. So that was for the first thing I did to put an hinge on my leg in 2023. The second thing that I did is that I've started to prioritize unilateral movements. For a very long time, I thought that these movements were, in a sense, a second thought, an afterthought, because a lot of the people who promote stuff like split squats tend to be dudes who have small legs, and so by association of ideas, I never took them seriously. Then there was also the fact that I always felt like balance was a big issue on that movement, and so because of that, I thought it was a poor lift for hypertrophy because it was very tough to progress on and to push the weight. But ever since I've changed my mindset regarding split squats and I've started to regard them as heavy-duty movements, I've finally come to realize that that's what they were always supposed to be. Actually, having split squats as a finisher for the leg day or lunges as a finisher, like I see many people program, is just poor programming because it's not aligned with what you want. Yes, it's a good way to shape and sculpt the VMO, but guess what? It's also a great way to build the legs in its entirety. And also, what could be better for the glutes than a split squat or a lunge? These movements target the glutes to a great extent. So I want you watching this video to start doing the same thing that I did. In your mind, the hierarchy between squats and split squats needs to be equal. One is not better than the other, and yes, you can absolutely have a program with no squat variations and only split squats, and you will still get great quads and you will still get great glutes. But how do we do it for hypertrophy? Well, first, I want you to stop doing dumbbell split squats. Dumbbell split squats are the easy, accessible variation that everyone does because, well, you just grab dumbbells and you just go at it. Unfortunately, they're also the worst split squat variation for a very simple reason, is because once you start getting strong at them, one, you'll need straps, which is okay. Two, the balance becomes an issue because the dumbbells become bulky, they run into your body, and now you end up just playing this weird balancing act where every single time I would reach the 75, 80 pounds per hands range, I would find myself failing, not because the muscle went to failure, but because I would lose balance and drop the dumbbells. So maybe it's just me being a klutz, but I know that this is a limiting factor for hypertrophy. So what I've done instead is I've replaced this variation with the most stable ones. The belt squat, split squat, that is exotic, but people should really be doing, and the SSB version. And wouldn't you know it, my performance skyrocketed to a point that I was then convinced that I was just sandbagging previously because it shouldn't be possible to get that strong on a lift that fast. It shows that I was limiting myself with the variation with dumbbells. So in about 6 months, I increased my split squat strength by about 50%. I went from doing sets of 12 with a total of 150 pounds, so with the two hands, to now doing my sets with close to 225 pounds per legs. And I don't say that to flex because frankly, I've come to realize with experience that this isn't even that much. I really believe that it's perfectly reasonable to expect to reach 300 pounds per legs on the split squats as an hypertrophy goal. This is not freak level strength. This is something that I think if you're fairly heavy like myself, you can shoot towards. It's realistic. So 2 changes for bigger legs. Open your training with your split squats and prioritize split squats as a main compound movement for the legs. And 2, start doing variations that are stable. If you don't have an SSB or a belt squat, you can also find a way to do it, I suppose, with a barbell, but please be safe. This is the next advice I have for you guys. Since we're going to start pushing the boundaries on split squats and using very heavy weights, you have to always have a safety protocol in place because this is a lift that if you fell, bailing out with one of your leg elevated behind you becomes extremely complicated and so it becomes dangerous. I've seen people fall forward and have the bar press on their neck. I don't want to be responsible for some of you guys getting decapitated. So you either do them in a rack with the safeties or in the Smith machine. That is a great use of that piece of equipment. You set the safeties high enough, and that way, if you fail, there is no risk. Of course, if you use a belt squat, you don't even have to worry about that because the safety is in your hands and you can re-rack at any point. So this was my second advice to you, and the second thing that I implemented to get bigger legs. Now, the third thing is a bit counterintuitive because it goes against what I've always preached, and that is that I reduced my leg training frequency. If you go back in the past, in my video about how to level up your legs, my number one advice was train your legs frequently. The worst thing you can do to get big legs is to fall for the leg day meme of training them only once a week because you're going to have horrible work capacity, horrible recovery, you're going to build a poor relationship with these lifts in the first place because you'll be sore for the whole week, so it's really not optimal for size. That being said, I found that the opposite is also true, where a 3-time-a-week frequency for lower body at some point becomes impossible because your recovery simply cannot catch up. And that's due to the very nature of leg training. You're very strong, your lower body is very strong, much stronger than the upper body. So the absolute load you're going to lift is also much higher. And when you get to a point where you start to handle in the low 400s for squats, in the low 500s for pulls, good luck doing that shit 3 times a week. You won't be able to. This is the point where 48 hours simply isn't enough to dig yourself out of that hole of fatigue you dug for yourself. Which is something to keep in mind if you're the type of person who runs a full body 3 times a week or an upper lower 6 times a week like I used to run. It might be very, very good for you now because it's going to allow you to build work capacity. But once you get past that threshold and you start to see that your recovery is suffering, this is the time where you really need to reduce your frequency because we never want to sacrifice intensity for frequency ever. But sacrificing frequency for intensity is perfectly fine, and that's exactly what I did. So now I train my legs 2 times a week, so either Monday, Thursday, or Wednesday, Saturday. And that way I always get either 72 or 96 hours between sessions. And this allows me to always be fully recovered and to push hard. Because there is nothing worse than getting into a leg session with heavy squats, heavy hinges, and feeling yourself drained before you even start. You know that this workout is not going to be productive, so why even do it? It's better to proactively modify the split so as to make sure that you get the time you need to recover. And despite that loss of volume, I've still been progressing fairly well because at the end of the day, progressive overload is king. So if your lifts are going up, unless you're getting a shit ton of fat, you know that you're adding muscle. And that's exactly the philosophy that I've followed. The good thing about this method being that it also frees up more time to train upper body. So I'm still training upper body 3 times a week. And this is not going to go anywhere. I'm very unlikely to reduce that frequency because unlike the muscles of the lower body, the muscles of the upper body are very numerous, so you have a long list of them you have to hit, and they also tend to require more frequency and volume because they recover very, very fast. I can no problem hit forearms 3 to 4 times a week, I can hit biceps, chest 2 to 3 times a week, but it's impossible for me to hit hamstrings hard 3 times a week. That is a no. Then there's also the general amount of energy required. I rarely feel drained and tired after I train upper body. But after lower body, every single session I come up the stairs dying and I have to drink orange juice because I feel like I'm about to pass out. These are things to keep in mind when you program for hypertrophy. Lower body is not the same beast as upper body. And when it comes to the difference, I'm personally a huge believer of intensity over volume for legs. I personally only do 6 sets of quads a week and 6 sets of hamstrings / posterior chain a week. That's it. That has been enough for me to grow. I might be an outlier, I don't know, but I would recommend you give that approach a shot. The tendency of doing just these long lists of exercise where you do 1 squat, 1 split squat, leg press, leg extension in the same workout, to me is junk volume 101. You're not getting much from that. But this doesn't mean that I don't recommend getting volume outside of the gym for your legs. I've always told you on the channel that cardio doesn't kill gains. It's a stupid idea promoted by gym bros who want to skip cardio. And since 2023, the year where I gained that inch, I've even started to think that actually having a cardio regimen on top of your lower body training is a great way to build bigger legs because it's going to help you by boosting recovery, but also by promoting overall conditioning. So I personally do cardio 2 times a week on top of the 2 leg sessions a week. I do it very intense and I do it focused on calves. So I'll run a mile on the treadmill, a mechanical treadmill that is not plugged in, where my own momentum creates the movement of the treadmill, which is tremendously harder than running outside or, of course, a normal treadmill. And I will focus on pushing the pace until I get to a point where I'm at the threshold, and I will stay at that pace for a mile. And I will focus on pushing off of my calves to make sure I get additional volume for that muscle group, because at the end of the day, why not? And then for steppers, so the Stairmasters, I do something that is diabolical, where I take a backpack, put weight in the backpack, get on the steppers, and then I get up the stairs on my tippy toes. So if the stair is this big, I'm only allowed to go this, like, space here with my foot, and this is the grippy part, so that way I don't actually fall like an idiot. And I will do 10 minutes again at a moderate pace, and this also makes you want to die because it's horribly difficult. I started with 0 pounds in the backpack and I'm up to 80 pounds. So it's a total of 300 pounds on that Stairmasters. I can tell you that when you do that, you feel and you come to understand with your body why fat people end up with big calves. But that's not all. I also have started doing weighted carries, because since I only train in the gym 5 times a week, I have 2 days off. I personally don't like days off, but I understand that at my level, I need the recovery. So what I do instead is I have weighted carry implements outside in my backyard, and when I don't train throughout the day, I'll go outside for 30 minutes and I'll just do weighted carries for 30 minutes. I will eventually record these sessions for you guys. I actually have an hypertrophy log that will be dropping later this week, so you'll get to see that. And I've really come to look forward to these sessions, maybe even more than the gym sessions, because 1, I do them in nature, which is always nice, and 2, it really feels good to be able to move heavy weights around like this outside of the context of the gym. You know, I hate the word functional, and I've been ranting and raving about functional fitness for a while because to me it's semantically inaccurate, but I must admit that it feels pretty fucking good to carry the equivalent of a fridge in your arms back and forth like it's absolutely nothing. You know, it really puts into context that all of the mass that I've put on my back and legs are not just for show. I can actually lift some pretty hefty things that the average person wouldn't even be able to budge. So if you are personally on your own road to bigger legs, I highly encourage you that you also include some form of cardio or active exercise into your training journey, because you don't want to be the guy who can squat all the weights, who has massive legs, but who also cannot go for a walk. I'm at a point where I truly believe that there is no point in having big legs if your legs are constantly hurting, or if you're not able to use them to do the most basic of things, like, for example, going for a hike. And I used to be that guy. I used to be the guy that couldn't go for a walk or a hike without his ankles or knees hurting. And I'm no longer that dude, which is interesting because back then my legs were smaller than they are now. So it's not even an excuse of having to sacrifice size for function or for health. The two can go hand in hand. And it's not just that they can go hand in hand, they should. Big legs equals healthy legs, and healthy legs equals big legs. Because all of the mass you put on now, when you're in your 70s or 80s, you'll be glad that you have, because that's the mass you're going to be able to use to keep moving when everyone else in the retirement home is stuck in the wheelchair and they can't even stand up anymore. And for those of you who think that this is an exaggeration, actually, this is a diagnosis that is extremely common in people that enter old age, where they can't sit up anymore from the couch because their quad muscles have melted. I never want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that can sit up inside his coffin at the wake. That's my goal. Now, these are the things that I did to get bigger legs, but you might have noticed that there's something I didn't mention, and that is isolation exercises. And that's for a very simple reason. It's because I don't do them. And that is explained 2 ways. The first is that I train at home and I don't have the space for machines at home, so I just do count pounds. And since I only train upper body at the commercial gym, I like having that split. Because when I train legs, I want to go heavy, I want to go ham, I want to listen to music, and it's just not something I can do at a commercial gym. And then 2, there's also the fact that I don't have a use for isolation because I was able to reach 28 inches legs without them. But this doesn't mean that these movements are useless. You know, I don't want to be the guy who has like massive arms and who tells you, oh yeah, I got this from pull-ups only, bro, so you don't need bicep curls. That's stupid. Isolation movements work, they're necessary, and they're also necessary for legs. I'm just saying that I haven't had to use them. Now, there's also a difference between the muscles of the legs and the function of the legs and the function of the arms, of the biceps, of the forearms, and the triceps. If you look at these functions, you'll quickly realize that it's very difficult to maximize the size of each muscle of the upper arm and lower arm with only compounds, whereas with legs, it's much, much easier. So a compound-only approach to lower body makes much more sense than a compound-only approach to upper body. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to forsake these movements forever. I think that the day I decide to go for a cut, because I want to partake in a bodybuilding show, this is when I'm going to go ham on these isolation movements, because one, it's going to allow me to take a step back from heavy lifts, because I won't have as much energy to do them, and I'll use that time to focus on sculpting the legs. Since I'll already have all of the mass in the quads and the hamstrings, I'll be able to focus on the small details of the VMO, of the adductors, etc., etc. Because realistically, if you look at my legs, my adductors could be bigger, because I've never isolated them. So that's very encouraging in a way, because my next road to bigger legs is to 30 inches legs. And I might have to tap into these isolation movements, like leg extensions, for example, to get these like extra little inches or half an inch, everything that I will be able to get, because I'm at a point where I'm so close to what some would call a natural limit or potential, which I don't believe in, that, yeah, you have to use all of the tools in the arsenal. At that point, you don't have a choice. So this last point is not there to tell you don't do isolations. Actually, it's the opposite. I encourage you to do isolations, because they're essentially free volume. You know, if you do 3 sets of 10 to 15 on the leg curl machine at the end of a leg session, that's literally just like free gains for your hamstrings. It's going to create zero systemic fatigue, and down the line, if you progress, you're going to get great hypertrophy benefits from that, especially if you're the type of person who struggles to actually recruit their hamstrings on hip hinges, which is not my case. So if you train in a commercial gym, if you have access to these machines, absolutely do add them to your training. But do not make the mistake of thinking that they can replace compounds. If you did this, to use an upper body analogy, it would be the equivalent of a guy who does no presses whatsoever and focuses only on cable flies to build a big chest. You understand that this guy is never going to have a big chest, because that movement should come as an addition to heavy horizontal pressing and not a replacement. But that's all I have for you guys today. This is how I put an inch on my legs in 1 year. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, you can do so by clicking the first link in the description. It's the coffee page. You can pledge $3 a month, and that helps me tremendously because it allows me to spend more time on these videos. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.